Good morning. Today we look at Genesis 20 through 22, those three chapters, and we see Abraham and Sarah again in these chapters. And Abraham, after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and we heard a little bit about Lot at the end of yesterday's readings, but Abraham and Sarah journey, he says, toward the region of the Negev, and he settled between Kadesh and Shur. And while he was there, again, King Abimelech is the king of the area, and Abraham, again, just like he did when he went to Egypt with Pharaoh, tells people that Sarah is his sister, because he's afraid that because she is so beautiful that they will kill him to take her, for whatever. So, and sure enough, he tells people that she is his sister, and the king, is taken with her love, or with her looks rather, and brings her to the palace. But God intervenes, and it's amazing to watch God leading and guiding in the early days of this Israelite nation. But anyway, God intervenes, and he comes to King Abimelech in a dream and tells him, hey, Sarah is not his sister; she is his wife. And Abimelech, realizes, he's glad that he hasn't done anything. She's there in the palace, but he has not called her to his bed or any of that yet. And so he goes and speaks to others, and then God said this. He's having this conversation with God in a dream, and he said, "Well, Abraham, didn't he tell me that she's his sister?" And I'm thinking about sometimes in a dream, we have these conversations that are real and revealing. And we all have those dreams like that, and so I can understand what's going on. But anyway, Abimelech rises early the next morning and calls his servants, and he calls Abraham there, and calls him out on, well, why did you lie to me? And then the truth comes up that Sarah is his half sister. It says in verse 12, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, but not of my mother. And we think, well, you're not supposed to marry your half-sister. And when we get into Leviticus, the laws change, and, then, it wouldn't be legal. But at the point in time of Abraham and Sarah, it wasn't frowned upon. And I remember growing up, that not so long ago, you had to take blood tests before you got married to make sure that you weren't related in any way to this person, or that your blood types would work together, for your children. And especially that was, you weren't to marry a cousin, especially a first cousin, or, those close relatives that way. And so, to read here that, Sarah was his half-sister is kind of a moment, it's kind of a wow. But anyway, it goes on, and Abimelech makes a promise then to Abraham and to Sarah, and then because of this, it says that God opened the wombs of Abimelech's wives and slaves so that they could have children, because God had closed them on behalf of Sarah. And I think I didn't quite understand that part of it, but that's what is written. And then in chapter 21, Isaac is born. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born, and it says, God has brought me laughter, and Sarah is just amazed and excited, thrilled that in her old age that she has a son. And the child grew, and says was weaned, but Sarah watched the son of Hagar, Ishmael, playing with her son Isaac. And again, Hagar and Ishmael get the brunt of Sarah's displeasure, and she sends them away. cast this slave woman and her son out, they will not inherit along with my son Isaac. But, the protective mother, the jealous mother, whatever. But we know again that God intervenes here on behalf of Hagar and Ishmael. And, verse 20 says, God was with the boy, and he grew up living in the wilderness, became an expert with the bow, and he lived in the wilderness, and his wife and his mother found him a wife from the land of Egypt. So Hagar and Ishmael, even though Sarah had, again, cast them out, they had been back in the area for, that whole time span in there, but and Ishmael was, roughly 13 years old by this time, playing with Isaac, and Isaac was old enough to, so they did. But anyway, God, watches out over people, and when we see that so much in this Old Testament, that God is very active in and with his people, and leading and guiding. And then when we get to verse 22, there's some problems here that Abimelech's people have taken over a well that Abraham had dug, and it was on sort of his land. And Abraham goes and complains to Abimelech about that. And Abimelech didn't really know that. And so, again, Abimelech and Abraham make a covenant, a promise between them. And Abraham takes seven ewe lambs and sets them apart. And it's, he says that this is my way of honoring and showing you that I'm not lying. This is important to me, that I'm not lying about having dug this well. And Abraham plants a tree there beside it. And he calls there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And it says Abraham resided as an alien many days in the land of the Philistines. And, the Philistines are going to come into big play, again later on. Not real close to time here, but we hear these names of people. And in chapter 22, Isaac has grown up a little bit. He's about 12, I think. And Abraham is told or asked by God to take his son, his only son, whom you love, and go to this mountain and offer him there as a burnt offering. So Abraham rose early in the morning, took 2 young men with him and his son. And I remember this scene in a movie. I can't think of the name of the movie right now, but as Abraham and Isaac and these 2 servants are getting ready to leave, Sarah comes and asks, "But my Lord Abraham, where is your offering?" And he just turns and he says, "My son, come." And later, she realizes and she goes running to this same place. And but we know the story that Abraham is ready to sacrifice his son, and God provides a lamb, and Isaac lives. And Sarah in that movie comes and finds Abraham and her son Isaac coming back down the hill. And it just brings to mind, the love that God has for us, that, he sent Jesus. That's, here we have God saying, take your son, your only son whom you love, and offer him as a sacrifice. And that's what God did for us. He took his son, his only son, Jesus, whom he loves, and offered him, as a sacrifice for us. It just, so we see this great faith of Abraham in the willingness to take this son that was born to him when he was 100 years old. And what are the prospects of him having, another son, but yet it's modeling for us also. It's a foreshadowing of God's great love for us. There's that Abraham has this great faith in God, And God has this great love for you and for me. And, when the time had come for that sacrifice for him to bind Isaac and to put him on that altar, to take the knife, and free his blood before the offering. But, it's just that God provides. And it's still so very true today that God continues to provide for us and for our salvation. This chapter ends with kind of, to me, a different deal. But Abraham's brother, Nahor, his wife Milcah, has provided sons for his brother Nahor, and these sons will come into play again later on as well. But we just had read such a heart-wrenching story of Abraham ready to sacrifice his son, and God providing, and then just this little interlude of Abraham's brother has children, so Abraham has nephews and others that way. But and again, it's God leading and guiding his people then, as he continues to do now.